Hello and welcome to the Epitome. I am your host, Nathan Bozeman, and today we're going to be asking a very important question. Was Jesus a real historical figure? Let's get into it. Mythicism, the belief that Jesus did not exist, is continuously growing in secular circles. And so today what we're going to do is give 3 reasons to believe that Jesus was a real historical person. And my first 2 are going to be biblical arguments, and my last one is going to be an extra biblical argument. And so hopefully we'll cover all the bases today on why you should believe Jesus is a historical figure. The first reason to believe that Jesus is a historical figure is the letters of Paul. The reason we can point to Paul's letters as good evidence for Jesus being a historical figure is because people believe that Paul himself is a historical figure. Scholars agree that the Apostle Paul was a real historical person. Early independent writers mention Paul, like Peter, Clement of Rome, Ignatius, Polycarp, and many others. Some of Paul's letters are disputed, but Paul's authorship of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Romans, and Galatians are undisputed by almost all scholars. So, since Galatians is an undisputed text by scholars today, let's see what it has to say about Paul and how he could know that Jesus really existed. In Galatians chapter 1, it says, "I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas, Peter, and stayed with him for 15 days. But I did not see another one of the apostles except for James, the Lord's brother." And Bart Ehrman says, if Jesus didn't exist, surely his best friend and his brother would know about it. So to recap, Paul's letters are good evidence for the fact that Jesus really existed because he himself is a historical figure, according to all scholarship, and he says that he met with Peter and James for 15 days and talked about Jesus, okay? And so this is good evidence to see that Jesus himself actually existed. Paul can also be appealed to because of his drastic life change. He went from martyring Christians and killing them to preaching the gospel and writing the majority of the New Testament. So what was the change all about? Clearly he had an encounter with the risen Christ. Our second reason to believe Jesus is a historical figure can be found in the embarrassing details in the Gospels. The Gospels are our primary source on Jesus. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, the Gospels are biased and they're written for religious purposes. Well, hold on, not so fast, because Jesus himself in the Gospels has some things that he does that would be considered embarrassing. And if you were writing a story, or if someone was making up a story about someone trying to portray them to be God in the flesh, do you think that they would include these kinds of details? Jesus got baptized, which is something that believers today do, humans. Jesus washed the disciples' feet, which was considered a lowly task. Jesus was crucified, which was one of the most shameful ways to be put to death. And finally, Jesus' disciples abandoned him before and after the crucifixion until they witnessed the resurrection. If you were going to make up a story where you were portraying a man to be God in the flesh, would you have him be baptized, kind of insinuating that something's wrong with him or he needs to be cleansed? Or would you have him be crucified, which is one of the most shameful ways to be killed? Or would you have his followers abandon him and be cowards and leave and then only come back and proclaim the gospel after they experience the resurrection? Or would you have him do lowly tasks like washing people's feet? This doesn't seem to me like they're fabricating some narrative, but it sounds like they're giving authentic testimony about what really happened. And our third and final reason for today to believe that Jesus is historical is external or contemporary corroboration. I'm going to share quotes from 2 different historians writing within the 1st and early 2nd century. The first one's going to be Josephus, and I have to give one preliminary remark before I get into it. The first quote I'm going to share with you is undisputed by scholars. It's considered authentic and that there was nothing different about it when he wrote it himself. The second quote, there's a lot of controversy around it because it seems to have been doctored by a later scribe who was a Christian, and so a lot of people throw this quote out and say that it's not authentic. But I've actually taken out all the parts that scholars think are doctored. And so hopefully what I have left to read to you is the authentic quote from Josephus himself. But if you're not okay with that, take the first quote for what it says, and then you can take the second one with a grain of salt. In the first quote, Josephus simply describes James as the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ. And once again, that quote is undisputed. Now here's the controversial one. In Book 18 in Jewish Antiquities, he says, "About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, for he was one who sought surprising feats, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. When Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing amongst us, had condemned him to be crucified, those who had in their first place come to love him did not give up their affections for him, and the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared." So these quotes are from a 1st century historian named Josephus, because he was born around 37 AD and died around 100 AD. He calls James the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ, and we learn as well that he was killed under Pontius Pilate. And you might say, well, that's in the second quote, that's debated. Well, we're going to get into our quote from Cornelius Tacitus now, and we'll see that this is actually established historical fact outside of the Bible and a non-contested quote. Tacitus said, "Nero punished with the utmost refinements of cruelty a class of men, loathed for their vices, whom the crowd styled Christians. Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate, and the pernicious superstition was checked for a moment, only to break out once more, not merely in Judea, the home of the disease, but in the capital itself, where all things horrible or shameful in the world collect and find a vogue." He did not seem to like Christians very much, did he? That's actually why this is such an important source, because it's written so close to Christ, whether it's the late 1st or early 2nd century, and on top of that, he calls Christians a disease, and he says that it originated from a man named Christus, Jesus, who was killed under Pontius Pilate. And we also see in this quote that Christians were being persecuted within the 1st and 2nd century. So this is also something historical that can point to the fact that people like Paul and Peter would have been martyred because of the persecution. So there you have it. Those are our 3 reasons to believe that Jesus was a real historical person. We have the letters of Paul, we have embarrassing details in the Gospels, and we have extra biblical evidence written by historians very close to Jesus' life. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I do have one resource on this that you could pick up. It's called Is Jesus History by John Dixon. It's a very short book. I think it has about 150 pages, very short read, and I thought it was very good on this topic. Thanks so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Share it with your friends if it's helpful for you, and like the video and comment down below if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. I could have gone into a lot more details about this, but I think that these are a great start for you, and hopefully if you read the book and other resources, you can be able to defend the fact that Jesus was a real person. And I'm also going to do a video in the future, very, very soon, hopefully, about the resurrection and why it should be accepted as a historical fact and not just something that was made up as a legend. So be looking forward to that. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around.